Hello students, I am Dr. Shweta Chandra, Assistant Professor at the Department of Tourism and Hospitality Management, Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi. Today we are going to take the session forward in continuation with the last session. In the last session we looked forward at the following: meaning of communication, communication and information, importance of communication, nature of communication, role of communication, communication process, and communication models. So, by now the basic process of communication is very clear to all of you. Almost all the models have the same structure with little deviations. It also has been clearly established that communication is the sole force behind weaving of organizations, human relations, and sets us apart from all other living beings. So, let us start today's session. The session flow and the learning objectives would be as follows. Types and forms of communications. In this section, we would specifically be looking at verbal and non-verbal communication. In today's world, communication is possible through vast variety of media, but for communication to be effective, very careful and judicious choice of media is required, which will depend on various factors like the urgency of message, time available, expenditure involved, intellectual and emotional level of the receiver. Communication is a closed process. Feedback is the final link in the chain of the communication process. After receiving the message, the receiver responds in some way and signals that response to the sender. The signal may take the form of a spoken comment, a long sigh, a written message, a smile, or some other action. Without feedback, the sender cannot confirm that the receiver has interpreted the message correctly. Successful communication depends on the encoding skills of the sender, how he frames and conveys the entire message, the listening skills of the receiver, and his capability to decoding the message. The environment plays a very important part in the entire process, as it should be free of any barriers and obstructions to let the sending and receiving happen. The success of the communication is judged by the feedback. The feedback is the link that establishes the success of communication. In case the sender gets the desired action, work response, then the communication is considered to be successful. In order to understand better, communication is divided into various forms. These forms are also known as methods or channels or mediums of communication. Communication forms: non-verbal communication, that is voice, tone, facial expressions, postures, body language. Verbal communication includes oral, written. This further includes face-to-face communication. The richest communication channel around is face-to-face meetings are often hailed as the most effective way for the teams to interact. Video conferencing, phone calls, emails, text messages, online messaging platforms, social media. On the basis of interaction, we can divide these as interpersonal conversations with ourselves, interpersonal one-to-one conversation, small group, that is press conferences, board meetings and team meetings, and public presentations, public speeches. Let's begin with non-verbal communication. The most basic form of communication is non-verbal. Long before human beings used to words to communicate, our ancestors communicated with each other by using body language such as gritting of teeth, anger, smile, touch to show affection. Thus, one can easily say the non-verbal communication is the communication without words. As human beings evolved over the period of time, the use of this form of communication has not diminished but has widened in scope. The two effective means of communication are, firstly, non-verbal communication. It is the form of sign language such as traffic lights, blowing of siren, telephone ring, traffic maps, etc. Secondly, communication through the body language, which includes paralanguage, proxemics, kinesics, oculesics, etc. Non-verbal communication is the integral yet complex part of our overall communication skills. Non-verbal communication is a message or response not only expressed in words, but words or hints. Non-verbal signals are deeply rooted and conscious part of our overall behavior. It is recognized as the route to discover what the other side wants. It is a combination of explicit and implicit meaning of words. It gives us information about the emotional state and reinforces the meaning of words. It can play 5 roles in communication, which are repetition, contradiction, substitution, complementing, and accenting. There are various types of non-verbal communication styles, which can be abbreviated as COPACT, that is KOPPACT. It stands for kinesics, oculesics, paralanguage, proxemics, artifacts, chromatics, and tactics. Meaning of kinesics. Now we will be seeing each one of these one by one. So let's begin with the meaning of kinesics. It is the interpretation of body language such as facial expressions, gestures, body movement, hand movements. It includes gestures, hand body movements, haptics, that is touching, oculesics, that is eye movement, head movement. In all verbal, non-verbal modes, facial expressions are the most significant as it plays 55% of our total non-verbal communication. Facial expressions can be further divided into micro expressions, sign languages, eye contact. Postures can reflect people's emotions, attitudes, and intentions. Research has identified a range of postural signals such as open and closed postures. It helps to determine an individual's degree of confidence, status, repetitivity to the audience. Moreover, postures help to identify the degree of attention and interpersonal relations. Gestures are woven into fabrics of daily lives. They strengthen our opinion by the movement of hands, waving, beckon, nodding, expressions, 9 sentiments or the navrasa. The meaning of gestures is interpreted differently across different cultures. It is important to be clear as it can lead to misinterpretations. Adapters, symbolic and conversational are 3 types of gestures. There are 3 main types of gestures, that is adapters, emblems and illustrators. Adapters are touching behaviors and movements that integrate internal states typically related to arousal or anxiety. Adapters can be targeted towards the self objects or others. In regular social situations, adapters result from uneasiness, anxiety or a general sense that we are not in control of our surroundings. Many of us subconsciously click the pens, shake our legs, engage in other adapters during classes, meetings or while waiting as a way to do something with our excess energy. Public speaking students who watch video recordings of their speeches notice non-verbal adapters that they didn't know they used. In public speaking situations, people most commonly use self or object focused adapters. Common self-touching behaviors like scratching, twirling, fidgeting, fingers, hands are considered self-adapters. Some self-adapters manifest internally as coughs, clearing sounds. Emblems are gestures that have a specific agreed on meanings. These are still different from the signs used by hearing impaired people or others who communicate using American Sign Language or ASL. Even though they have a generally agreed upon meaning, they are not a part of the formal sign system like ASL that is explicitly taught to a group of people. A hitchhiker, raised thumb, OK, index finger connected with a circle and other three fingers sticking up and the raised middle finger are all examples of emblems that have an agreed upon meanings or meanings with the culture. Emblems can still be an emotion. For illustrators are the most common type of gestures and are used to illustrate the verbal message they accompany. For example, you might use hand gestures to indicate the size of the object. Unlike emblems, illustrators do not typically have meaning on their own and are used more subconsciously than emblems. These largely involuntarily and seemingly natural gestures flow from us as we speak, but vary in terms of intensity and frequency based on the context. Although we never explicitly taught how to use illustrative gestures, we do it automatically. Think about how still gesture when having an animated conversation on a phone even though the other person can't see you. Now we move on to oculesics. How we use eyes. It is all about how we use eyes. It deals with eyes, span or eye contact. We can deceive people through eyes. We should try to establish proper eye contact as it can give proper indications to the audience. It can help establish interest, engagement, involvement and attention with the audience. It basically helps to serve three main purposes. Firstly, it helps us to give and receive feedback. Looking at someone lets us know that the receiver is concentrating on the content of the speech and not maintaining eye contact can indicate disinterest. Secondly, it helps people to know when is their turn to speak. Eye contact is more likely to be continuous when someone is listening rather than speaking. When a person has finished what they have to say, they will look directly at the other person and this gives a signal that the arena is open. Thirdly, it helps to communicate something about a relationship between people. When you dislike someone, you tend to avoid to make an eye contact and pupil size is often reduced. On the other hand, the maintenance of positive eye contact signals interest or attraction in the audience. Some of the examples of this are Narendra Modi and Barack Obama. Now let's move on to proxemics. This is all about how do we use space. It is the distance and an intimate relation closeness between people, group or society. It involves embracing, touching, whispering. This is seen as close friends, relatives, mutual friends share excellent space with each other and are able to understand each other better. We all have a need for physical space, although the need differs depending on the culture, the situation and the closeness of the relationship. One can use space to communicate many different non-verbal messages, including signals of intimacy, affection, aggression and dominance. While delivery of speech, one must have an 8 to 10 feet distance. These are the zones in the space language. We call them spatial zones. Intimate zone, that is 0 to 18 inches. Personal zone 18 to 4 feet. Social zone 4 to 12 feet and public zone beyond 12 feet. As we see that a person feels safe in an intimate zone, the personal bubble is considered to be around 3 feet. That is the diameter of the intimate zone. Relationships at home or with close friends work in an intimate and personal zones. When we communicate within the community, known but not close to us, it is called a group. When we deal with an open audience or public, we call that a public zone. Let's move on to now paralanguage or vocalics. It refers to the non-verbal element of communication used to modify meaning and convey emotion. It is the study of non-verbal uses of the voice that indicate emotion and provide cues as to how the message should be interpreted. Non-verbal cues can take many forms, including pitch, tone, rate, volume and accent, pattern, and will influence how the message is received and interpreted. When we speak, other people read our voices in addition to listening to our words. They pay attention to our pace of speaking, time, loudness, tone and inflection. Our tone of voice can indicate sarcasm, anger, affection and confidence. Pitch is the high and low modulation of the voice. It depicts anger and happiness. High pitch helps to reinforce with cover and quote. High pitch helps to highlight the importance of the message, and low pitch can determine less importance, fatigue and disinterest. Now let's move on to the artifacts, which is also known as artifactics. These are the physical objects such as clothing, home, cars that indicate to others a person's personal and social beliefs and habits. Messages are thus conveyed in a non-verbal manner. One of the first judgments that people make when they see an individual, whether it is a stranger or a friend, is based on that person's clothing and appearance. Accurate or not, these inferences affect how people view and react to others. Clothing can communicate many ideas including social class, attitude, conservative, liberal, moderate, style, creativity and age. For example, a professor is more likely to take seriously a student who dresses conservatively and appropriately for a class than a student who constantly lounges in sweats and an old t-shirt. Jewelry as well communicates certain messages. Political buttons inform others of your views and activity concerning society, while college rings or religious adornments reveal personal values and beliefs. Engagements and wedding rings indicate matrimony and the union of two people in love, though the type of rings can further indicate wealth and thus social class. Large stones are usually associated with those who have money, while simple and plain rings are often reserved for those with less wealth. They communicate economic level, educational level, trustworthiness, social position, level of sophistication, economic background, social background, educational background, level of success, morale, character, masculinity, femininity, and they help to create the first impressions. Now let's move on to chronemics. It is the study of use of time in non-verbal communication. The way an individual would perceive and value time, structure our time, and respect to time is a powerful communication tool and helps set the stage for the communication process. Chronemics or timing plays a very important role in presentation to establish proper synchronization or wavelength between the verbal and non-verbal communications. The sense of time helps to indicate the starting and the ending of an event. It can depict interest and disinterest in the audience as well as the speaker. For example, looking at the watch while giving the presentation can indicate disinterest and can evade the audience from listening and marks the loss of interest. Various aspects of time are temporal: processing, cognition, emotions, embodiment, interval time and perception. Now let's move on to another factor, that is touch. Now this is the last, right? So touch means this is also known as tactilics. It can help to reassure people, make them comfortable or even dissuade them and discomfort them. A touch can send a positive or a negative signal. A touch, we communicate a great deal through touch. Think about the message given by the following: a weak handshake, a timid tap on the shoulder, a warm hug, a reassuring slap on the back, a patronizing pat on the head, or a controlling grip on your arm. So, non-verbal communication strengthens a first impression in common situations like attracting a partner, or in a business interview. Impressions are on average formed within the first 4 seconds of contact. First encounters or interactions with another person strongly affect a person's perception. When the other group or person is absorbing the message, they are focused on the entire environment around them, meaning the other person uses all the 5 senses in the interaction. 83% is sight, 11% hearing, 3% smell, 2% touch and 1% taste. Now let's move on to the verbal communication. Verbal communication involves the use of spoken symbols that are generally have universal meanings for all who are taking part in the communication process. It may be oral or written. Oral communication. It is the channel of communication in which message is transmitted in spoken form. The term oral means pertaining to the mouth. There are two components of oral communication. They are the words and the manner in which the words are pronounced. In oral communication, sender and receiver exchange their ideas through speech, either face to face, or it may take place through some mechanical or electrical device such as voice, mail, phone, computer. Again, it would be one to one or one to many. Depending on the type, various types of oral communications are face to face conversation. Now, face to face interaction is a social interaction carried without any mediating technology. When one person discusses his views and opinions to another person and exchanging their views in presence of both, then this is called face to face conversation. It also includes the face to face discussion on a particular issue. In this method, both the information receiver and sender can exchange their views freely and fairly. It is characterized by immediate response, expression of feeling, better coordination and feedback. Now, let us move on to the second part, that is a lecture. A lecture is an oral presentation intended to present information or teach people about anything. Critics point out that lecturing is mainly a one-way method of communication that does not include significant audience participation. Now, let us move on to meetings and conferences. A meeting is a group of communication in action around a defined agenda at a set time for established duration. Meetings can be effective, ineffective or a complete waste of time. Meetings can occur face to face, but increasingly during these times, business and industries are turning to teleconferencing and video conferencing options as the technology has improved. The cost to participate has reduced and the cost of travel including time is considered. Now, let us move on to the fourth part, that is an interview. The interview is a conversation which has a purpose and is directed towards an object by the interviewer. The interview is normally a face-to-face meeting and discussion between two or more people for a specific purpose. Now, let us move on to video conferencing. Video conferencing is a live visual connection between two or more remote parties over the internet that stimulates a face-to-face meeting. Video conferencing is important because it joins people who would not normally be able to form a face-to-face connection. At its simplest, video conferencing provides transmission of static images and text between two locations, and its more sophisticated, it provides transmission of full motion video, images and high quality audio between multiple locations. Now, talking about social and cultural affairs. Social interaction is a process of reciprocal influence exercised by individuals over one another during social encounters. Usually, it refers to face-to-face encounters in which people are physically present with one another for a specified duration. However, in contemporary society, we can also think of social encounters that are technologically mediated like texting, Skyping or messaging. Now, let us move on to seminar. Seminar may be defined as a discussion in a small group which with the result of research or advanced study is presented through oral or written reports. Seminar is simply group communication in which open person makes a presentation or speech on a topic by highlighting its contents in the light of present and pressing problems. This presentation or speech is followed by question and expect comments from the audience. The seminars is a mixture of speech and group discussion. During seminar, one person acts as a chairperson of the session and conducts the seminar by introducing the topic and the speaker. At the end of the session, he asks the audience to raise questions and ensures that the discussion flows in the light of the theme. Now, let us move on to one of the very important and quite old means of communication, that is radio. Radio sounds communication by radio waves, usually through the transmission of music, news and other types of programs from single broadcast station. to multitude of individual listeners equipped with radio receivers. From its birth early in 20th century, broadcast radio astonished and delighted the public by providing news and entertainment with an immediately never before through this was possible. Based on the human voice, radio is a uniquely personal medium, invoking a listener's imagination to fill the mental images around the broadcast sounds. More readily and in a more widespread fashion than any other medium, radio can soothe listeners with comforting dialogues or background music, or it can jar them back into reality with polemics and breaking news. Radio can also employ a boundless plethora of sound music effects to entertain and enthrall listeners. It is one-way communication medium. Now let's move on to telephone. Telephone is the transmission of speech over a distance either by electric signals propagated along conductors or by radio signals, a type of telecommunication. Telephone communication permits conversation to be carried between people separated by almost any distance. A telephone is a telecommunication device that permits two or more users to conduct a conversation when they are too far apart to be heard directly. A telephone converts sound typically and most efficiently the human voice into electric signals that are transmitted via cables and other communication channels to other telephone, which reproduces the sound to the receiving user. The telephone provides for a faster interaction than mail as much as personal and is easy to use. People remember a distinct voice. They remember the unique way the person made them feel and helped them. It is likely they still want to speak to that person again next time they have an issue, or they may be so satisfied with the personal touch that they will not hesitate to give a positive feedback to the business or even better recommend you to someone else. It is so important because on the phone creates the continuous dialogue, instant level of credibility, trust, energy. It moves the process from getting leads to getting clients and a lot quicker than it would be you are going through with that virtual communication, which is typically where it initially begins. To transition from the virtual world into the business, frequently the phone dialogue is the one thing that is not only going to move it is a lot quicker, but it is going to make it a lot more effective as well. Speaking over the phone is usually the absolutely best option for issues like scheduling appointments, asking for deliverables, etc., and this can save hours of frustration. It also gives out without saying that complex problems are quick and straightforward to solve over phone calls. Where there is a problem, it's a good way to talk. It becomes much more comfortable for the customers to explain their issues in detail, and this avoids long email threads. A single phone call can save hours of frustration and hours of delay to resolve otherwise. Now let's move an interesting part of a communication that is known as grapevine. It is an informal channel of business communication. It is called so because it stretches through the organization in all directions irrespective of the authority levels. To hear something through the grapevine is to learn something informally and unofficially by means of gossip or rumors. Grapevine communication includes unofficial and quick conversations amongst employees of the same rank. Grapevine communication can be categorized into 4 types depending on its purpose or outcome. It is an informal communication network where information flows freely throughout the organization. Grapevine is the most common form of informal communication. It connects people in the organization and transmits information in every direction, vertical, horizontal and diagonal. It cuts across formal positions and facilities, social, personal and psychological interaction among people. Though it travels faster than the formal communication channel, it also carries gossips and rumors with it. Grapevine communication normally occurs when someone changes is introduced in organizational policies, change in office automation, and people are located close to each other as individuals or groups in order to discuss matters. Features of the grapevine communication. Grapevine communication has the following features. It connects almost everybody in the organization. It flows in every direction, vertical, horizontal and diagonal. It does not follow an official chain of command. It is a very fast channel of communication. It generally occurs at the work site, though it may occur outside the organization also. It arises out of social and personal interaction amongst people in the organization. It is based on people rather than task. It generally occurs orally. It occurs in various forms known as communication chains. Patterns of grapevine communication. Now, grapevine communication chains are, grapevine communication chain presents the pattern in which the information flows in different directions. As per Keith Davis, he has identified 4 types of communication chains. Single strand chain. In this chain, the information passes from one person to another in a sequential order. A tells something to B, who tells to C, C to D, and so on till the information finally reaches the person concerned. It appears like this. Conceptualize it in the form of a chain model. Then the second form is gossip chain. In this chain, one person passes information to everyone else in the organization. He is not selective about passing the information. This information may not be related to work, but is of interest to all. It appears like this. We have a center from where the rumors generate. Now, let's move on to the third, that is probability chain. In this chain, information is passed randomly by one person to others. These persons further pass information in the same random fashion. This information is not significant, but it is somewhat interesting, and it appears like a scattered diagram. Then the fourth part is the cluster chain. In this chain, one person passes information to a selected few confidentially, saying that please keep it to yourself. That is, communication is done with the people whom the sender trusts. Some of them keep the information to themselves and others pass it on to others few whom they trust. Information of interest is transmitted further and rest is retained by the members. It is the most common pattern of grapevine or informal communication, and it appears in the form of clusters. On the basis of the number of people involved in the communication, it could be intrapersonal, that is communicating with ourselves. When we communicate, we talk to ourselves. Then it can be interpersonal, one-to-one conversation. In small groups, press conferences, board meetings, team meetings, and when it is a large gathering, it could be a public presentation, public speeches. With this, we come to the end of this session. Just to recap the session, this session was an attempt to familiarize you all with understanding of the various forms of communication, specifically verbal and non-verbal communication. Hope you've got a clear understanding that communication is beyond mere words. It is a holistic concept involving various aspects. We also studied COPACT, KOPPACT, in non-verbal communication and its importance. Hope you find this session interesting and it has been able to give you a fair idea about the verbal and non-verbal communication. Here, I would like to clarify one thing, that one has to keep in mind always that communication is an integrated process and would always include the components, the verbal component and the non-verbal component. Both these have to be synchronized and in synchronization for making the communication impactful. Thank you so much.